Right. You're on.
Alright. So guys, basically tonight, just want to go through sort of a generic Vaal Caddis pattern that I've been fishing for the last couple of years with large degrees of success. It's been a very good pattern for us. We fished it from the Vaal. Daniel's taken the same fly. He's fished it in Norway, and he's also fished it now recently in Norway. He also fished it in Slovenia. They caught grayling, they caught trout in it in Slovenia and Norway. It's just a general all-purpose control caddis. So the general color is the olive, because olive always seems to be the main sort of color, especially on the Vaal, in terms of the caddis. You know, you do get some on the mustard caddis, but I mean, majority of the times when you fish it in tandem with an olive pattern, I generally seem to find the olive pattern gets more attention. So what I'm fishing here or tying is a size 12 scud hook. I tie these down to a size 18 scud hook, the exact same pattern, just depending on the times of the year. Early season now, I've got a lot of fish so far on the size 18s and size 16s that are weightless. A little bit later on in the season, the heavier pattern for me comes into its own from about December all the way through to March. Majority of the fish that I catch, even when fishing in tandem with your orange bead, hotspot nymphs and other things, this is the pattern that generally gets the most attention. So it is quite a heavy pattern. You guys tie it in varying weights according to the sort of water that you want to fish. So I've got a 3.5mm tungsten bead on this. So it's oversized for a size 12 hook. Usually we'd use a 3, but if you want to fish lighter, you can still fish it like a 2.5mm, put less lead wraps underneath, and then you can fish it in the shallow riffle water as well. Because the main thing at the moment, the yellows are feeding in the deep water, but in the afternoon, from about 4 o'clock, they start moving into the shallow stuff. But if you're fishing heavy flies, you don't get a touch. You take all your heavy control flies off immediately and fish 2mm beads or 2.5mm beads or something like that, and it stays in the upper column. And guys did very well. Daniel got a lot of fish. He got probably about 12 fish in the last 20 minutes, fishing 2.5mm tungsten nymphs right in the surface column in the phosphorus water. So it's something to just keep in mind. So what I'm going to do here is I'm using 0.15 lead. I'll just do a base, yeah, 0.15mm lead. And you're going to do a base wrap first. So start it from just as the bend starts, because if you started lower than that, you're going to have a problem tying in the materials and getting the right taper body. So you start it in just above the bend of the hook there. I don't know if you can see that well. A little bit blurry, but it's not too bad. And you're just going to follow that all the way through to the top. And if you put a thread base underneath first, then you're not going to be able to slide the lead in under the bead, because it sticks onto the thread base. So start off without any thread, and you just work it right up to the head here, and then you can actually slide it into the hook. And then it holds the bead as well, so you're not going to have a loose bead or have any issues in terms of tying off later on. And then what I generally do is, just to build the taper, as you come back about 7 or so wraps, just to get a thorax area, and you can just pull it off because it's very, very soft thread. This is a very heavy fly, so this is for now, especially because a lot of the fish we're catching are in chest deep water, so you need to get it down reasonably quickly, because you can't really, French nymph it and fish very far away from your body. You're doing the good old sort of Vaal check nymphing with this at the time. But if you want to lighten this, you just don't add that thorax section in, and use a 3mm bead, and then you can fish it in sort of knee and waist deep water happily. Then it's actually not too heavy. So you just pinch off the lead, so you've got a nice taper on the body, and then get your thread involved. So be careful when tying in the thread, because you see what I've done there is I've just started in the middle, and you wrap back around the back of it, and you catch it and pull it back to the front, because that'll hold it all in place there, so that when you're wrapping through and trying to just cover the lead a little bit, it doesn't push it down the shank. It just holds it all together for you, otherwise you're going to have a problem. Trim off the excess. And now what you want to do is just build a little base, just to flatten it out. And again, it's almost like a figure of 8 wrap, essentially, if you were tying on a post or something like that. You just want to catch it to stop it from then spinning off. and just build up the taper. Because the most important thing about these flies is honestly, in my opinion, it's not the pattern, it's not the colors and all of those sorts of things. I mean, the main focus of this is you want a reasonably slim but tapered profile. So it needs to be reasonably thin towards the bum, tapering up smoothly into the thorax area. And again, not too much dubbing or anything. So you can see I just filled up the little gap here, just to make it easy when you're wrapping up with this Antron yarn. Then it just keeps it nice and smooth. So the thing with the Antron yarn is there is a little sheen to it. I don't know if you... I'm just going to put it here. There. So there's a little bit of a nice, almost metallic kind of sheen to this. So you can fish this as a caddis larva on the bottom, or you could swing it and it becomes a pupa, because it almost looks like it's starting to emerge. When they emerge, they release gas bubbles into their body, and it gives a translucency to the actual body of the fly. So the thing that's nice is it actually keeps that translucency, and you can fish it as an emerger, even though it's very heavy. On the swing, once you finish your drift, you can actually swing it nicely. You just change the angle of the hook just so that you can tie in the materials at the back. For the olive patterns, I generally tie it with a silver wire. For the mustard colored ones, you're then going to tie it with copper, or if you want to change things up a little bit, you can tie it with red to add a little bit of a trigger to it, or a hotspot. And I'm tying with a medium, I don't know if you can see there, it's a medium silver wire. And now the thing with this, if you tie it in over the top here, you're then going to create a hell of a lot of bulk on the back of the fly. So what you want to do is just catch the tip in here, just below where the thread, the lead is, and break the thread. So we'll try that again shortly. It's not nano silk, that's why. Oh, my nano silk is almost done. Let's just catch it in here again. Right, we'll try it again. So just catch it in the back, because then when you create the little taper on the bum here, it doesn't add extra bulk onto the pattern. And then what you do is, I'll leave this for you guys, I've got a little stretch of my own here. So it's just your normal Antron yarn. I mean, I've got it, it comes on a roll like that. You can also get it comes on these little cardboard pieces. Doesn't matter which one you use. And the thing that's nice is they come in a lot of different colors. So if you want to tie olive, you've got olive. They've got nice tan colors, there's brown colors. I mean, you've really got a nice range. So again, you just catch it in, and to take away the bulk, just pull it in so it just stops short of that lead, and then get the wraps in here so it doesn't affect the taper of the fly once you get all the way through. Once you get here, just right the fly again, and to make sure I don't have issues later, just catch the thread so if it breaks again I don't lose everything. Now when you're wrapping this, you can twist it if you want to, and you'll get segmentation. But with that, then you need quite a bit thicker here, because otherwise you're going to get very thin segmentation all the way through the fly. And we've got the silver wire here, which is going to create the segmentation. So for me, it's always nice that you just keep it flat, and you start wrapping from the base here. And you can wrap it quite tightly. Make sure that you cover all the lead, cover all your thread. Doesn't matter what color thread you use, because all of these things will cover it, and they're not so translucent that the black's going to shine through the bottom. So you can do whatever you want in terms of thread, especially if you've got old thread that you guys don't use anymore. That's generally what I do with these Vaal patterns and things. Find old thread that you haven't used in a while and use that instead of using your good thread.
You've left a bit of a gap between the head and the...
Yes, I'm going to put the thorax in there.
Ah, okay.
So I thought I'd missed a gap on the other side there. So you just trim that off, and then you come up, just make sure you don't lose that, because if you do, there's a problem. And now with this, what I try and do generally with all my patterns is try and have 5 wraps. So then you don't overdo it and you don't underdo it, and you end up getting a nice segmentation effect. If you do too many wraps, then you may as well tie a brassy. If you do too few wraps, then there's no real point in having the thing on there. So always try and get a reasonable spread in terms of your wraps. So I don't know if it's showing through there so well. It's not too bad. Well, the flour will be here as well. And try get sort of as even as you can. You know, get the 4 or 5. So 4 is still okay. As soon as you start going more than 5, for me, you're overdoing it in terms of your base color, and you'll lose the effect of what that base color is, and you'll start showing off then the silver wrap or the copper wrap or whatever it is that you decide to use.
So you counter through, you're doing it while you're counter to
No, I'm wrapping normal way, yeah. So the thing that's nice is if you keep wrapping the same way, when you tie off, you're tightening. If you counter wrap, then you're going to actually, when you tie it tight, you might loosen the copper wire. For these sorts of patterns, it doesn't matter too much because the copper or the wire is actually quite thick. So if you do counter rib and it's a little bit loose, it's still not going to shift too much. And you know, the yellows, they don't really have an abrasive mouth, so they're not going to damage it. But on trout patterns, if you do counter, often ones that I counter rib, they bite through and break that wire on the first fish. And it doesn't affect the effectiveness of the pattern a lot of the times, but you know, if that is your trigger, if you're using a bright, like a really, really bright white silver rib, and it disappears, and you lose a lot of the effectiveness of the fly.
Can you just swim some of that? The other way? Okay. Yeah.
Alright, so, I mean, you can see on this, it's a very thin pattern, a lot of lead underneath, so it's going to be very heavy. You can build it up with wool as well if you wanted a lighter pattern. So you can do a heavy bead over here, build the body up with a bit of wool, you wrap that over the top, and because of the heavier bead here, a lot of the time it'll ride hook point up as well, so you don't snag up on the bottom as much. This doesn't really ride hook point up, it rolls, but with a completely weightless body and a heavy bead, it does sit point up a lot of the time. So it's quite a nice weightless pattern and also weedless pattern at the time. And then what I generally use, guys, is a black scud back for the olive patterns. If I'm tying a mustard caddis, I'll use a brown scud back or that reddish brown scud back. But it creates a nice wing case. And what you do is you just trim off at a slight angle. It gives you a tying in point. Yeah, you can sort of see that. There you go. And just, if you've got a rotary vise, then you can turn it on top so you can tie it on top nicely. And tie in just on the tip section.
How wide is that strip?
So I've trimmed it. Generally what we try and do is the strip is about as wide as the hook gape and the eye of the hook. But the challenge with these scud hooks is that ends up being quite drastic. So I just try and get it to be about 1.5 times the width of the actual fly, because then that wraps around just on the sides of the thorax, and then you get a good cover. Because if it's too thin, a lot of the time you lose the effectiveness of the thorax cover or the wing case. So yeah, probably about 1.5 times the thickness of the fly. I just chopped this off so you can work with the gauge off this, because I cut that off earlier. So that's the generic large scud back that you buy at the shop. And then what I'll generally use, I've got a bright green there, but we'll come out with one of mine here. So your generic black hare's ear dubbing, use that for the thorax, and you can sort of rough it up and pluck it out at the end. You can add a little bit of UV dub into this if you want to, but you know, early season, a lot of the time you want a slightly duller pattern, so those are generally more effective. Later in the season, when you get into probably February on the Vaal, then you can start fishing quite bright flies. I mean, they're in full feeding mode there, so I mean they'll eat almost anything. Again, just dub thin on here so that you can always take off a little bit if you need to. And the thing that's nice with this pattern is it's very, very versatile in terms of its use and when tying. So if you wanted to use this as a caddis pupa pattern, all you'd have to do is add a soft tackle, add some organza sticking out on the sides here, and you'd have little legs or little wing buds or anything like that. And I mean, you could use it on the trout streams. In the sizes sort of 16 and smaller, I use these on a trout stream as a top dropper happily. And I mean, a lot of the time on the drift, that's what the fish go for, especially in the slightly slower pools. And I generally wrap from the front first and work my way to the back, just so that you trap in enough, because then you can see if you've got enough or not. Put a bit too much on. And you want this to be reasonably thin as well, because if you overdo this, it's going to affect the sink rate of the fly, regardless of how much weight's on here. If that's very big and bulky, a lot of the water sinks in there and it'll slow the sink rate, so you're not having as effective a control fly as you would have wanted. So then at the end, just turn it towards you if you can. And this is a point where you don't want to break your thread. You just try and trap it in so that you've got the last segment must be about probably 2 or 2.5 times the size of your average segmentation that you do in terms of your wire. Because the thorax section of the fly, or of a caddis, as you guys would have seen in a lot of books, and whilst on the Vaal, they've got quite a big thorax section just before the head. So that is something that you want to emphasize. If that's too small, you lose a lot of the effectiveness of the pattern. So I'll do about 3 wraps here. You don't pull it too tight just yet. Once you turn it around here, leave this on and trim that off as your last function. Because if the thread does break in this last part, you're going to be very unhappy. And you whip finish it. And that is the end of the pattern. Once you trim it off, you're then ready to go. And that's it. So generally with a hair's ear like this, I'll brush it out. But it depends. I don't know if it does make too much of a difference on sort of these sorts of patterns. But you can rub it a little bit and get a little bit hairy. Just give it a bit of legs. But it's a very effective pattern. It's worked for us all over the world. So, yeah. Alright. And once you get it going, you can probably tie these in about 2 minutes per fly. So you can really churn them out quite quickly. Alright. Yeah.